Hello folks, and welcome to the long overdue 6th instalment of Session Heroes. This time we're looking at Shawn Tubbs. Originally from the Southern California area and growing up in a musical household, Shawn had a guitar in his hands from around 5 years old. His dad played in a surf band called the Orbits and introduced him to artists like Hank Williams and the Beatles. His mom introduced him to Christian artists like Phil Keaggy and the Sweet Comfort Band. By 9 or 10 years old, Shawn was hooked. His brother Lonnie had introduced him to the Brecker Brothers and Weather Report, and Shawn had started discovering fusion and session players of the era like Larry Carlton and Robben Ford. Other influences Shawn would pick up along the way would include Scott Henderson, Pat Metheny, Michael Landau and Steve Lukather, amongst a whole host of others. And aside from a few lessons in high school, Shawn has been self-taught his entire life. An interesting and perhaps little known fact is that Shawn went to high school with Scott Weiland and Robert DeLeo of Stone Temple Pilots. Scott was very close with Shawn's brother Lonnie, and Shawn became friends with Robert DeLeo while they were both working at Mesa Boogie Hollywood. When STP were booked to play MTV Unplugged, Shawn was approached to help them arrange the songs for acoustic. This ended up evolving into the band actually asking Shawn to join them on both MTV Unplugged and on Saturday Night Live. So if you check out that footage on YouTube, you will see a very long-haired Mr. Shawn Tubbs in the back with an acoustic guitar. Many of Shawn's other early sessions were on the Christian music scene in and around LA, often with artists through Vineyard and Maranatha Music. It was through this that Shawn was introduced to Crystal Lewis, who he would record with for the next 20 years. In the early 90s, Shawn and his brothers also spent some time in an alt-rock band called The Violet Burning. Shawn recorded all the guitars on a record called Strength, released in 1992. Back then, Shawn would have been using a rack setup built at Lab Sound, where he used to work, and would likely have been using Mesa Boogie preamps and Valley Arts guitars. So check out that record for some amazing 90s guitar sounds. Okay, so rather than kind of go too deep into gear and like a specific tone, I just want to talk a little bit more about principles in terms of how Shawn seems to approach sculpting his sound. He talks about this quite a lot on his own channel, so it's definitely worth going and having a pick through there because there's some great knowledge that can be harvested from it. But more often than not, it seems like Shawn's been a kind of clean amp platform kind of guy. Now, if you look back at his kind of history of gear, we have obviously his divided by 13 FGR 37. He's used a Badger 30. He's currently got a Dirty Shirley by Friedman. He's used Matchless in the past and a bunch of other amps, but it seems a lot of the time, judging by how his boards have been constructed, that he's using a clean channel, which is kind of probably pushed just to the edge of breakup, just loud enough that when you hit a push box, like a boost pedal or an overdrive, it's going to kind of push the amp over into that sort of breaking point, and you're going to get that lovely marriage of pedal and amp. He's not using, well, apart from in pedal demos like where he's using his Bella, but I wouldn't think he's using a super high headroom clean sound, something like a, you know, like a Fender Twin, for example, because we're not going to get that to break up with an overdrive pedal. Now, when it comes to dialing his overdrives, he's generally quite a low gain kind of guy, and he will try and find just that sweet spot where he's got enough to do what he needs to do, but not really more than that. It seems that he really likes the character of the guitar and the pickups and the woods, and most importantly his hands to come through. He doesn't want that to be obscured by lots of effects. Maybe like a slightly different scenario back in the early 90s, because the sound then was generally something a little bit more effects laden, but certainly these days he seems to prefer quite natural amp style overdrive sounds. I've been using this sort of sound, and I'm just going to tell you the components I've used to build that up. Now, at the moment, due to my amps currently being repaired and stuff, I'm using my Kemper, and how I've approached building this sound is just to look at the components that Shawn uses. So I'm using, in this case, a Dirty Shirley Sim, and it's pretty low gain, as you can hear. There's a bit of breakup, but it's not crazy. And that's why I've talked about kind of trying to find that sweet spot. I can kind of do what I need. And if I flick to my humbucker, for example, I get a bit more saturation, a bit more sustain. Now, in terms of effects and stuff, Shawn's pretty minimal. So often we'll hear a delay, but it's a fairly simple kind of unadorned digital delay, maybe dialed like a little bit darker than our kind of original signal, and we normally only have a couple of repeats. That way, it doesn't really matter what we do, whether it's rhythm or lead stuff, it's going to stay out of the way of your playing. It's never going to kind of muddy it up or start to sound messy. He also tends to favour a little bit of reverb. At the moment, I think he's using a Flint. Again, not a crazy amount, just a kind of fairly natural sounding hall or plate style sound to give your guitar sound just a little bit of air. And that's kind of pretty much it. If we look at the kind of bare bones components of it, and it's really just about dialing the EQ to your guitar. Now, because Shawn has for most of his life been a studio guy, he understands that in terms of how you EQ guitar sounds, you're EQing it to fit into a mix. So if you look at how he dials his amps, often he's cutting bass, he's pushing mids, and then he's finding the kind of treble sweet spot depending on which guitar he's using. And that's a good rule of thumb. You don't want to be dialing a load of bass, because although it might sound cool in the room, all that's going to happen is as soon as you put that into a track, you're going to have to start carving it out so that it's not getting in the way of other instruments. Now, like I mentioned earlier, there's so many examples of very kind of different guitar sounds if you look through Shawn's work. How I settled on this one was just to look at one of his videos. I think it's one of his Strat videos, and I just kind of dialed something in a similar. That's a good way to do it. Pick a tone that you like, and then really use your ears to try and match the EQ, match how much delay, how much reverb is being sort of mixed in, and just go from there.
Do I dare to dream so big? Do I stop and think what is? There's a reason that I feel hurt, wish, hope, breathe, live. I need to know in this chaos.
From his work with Crystal Lewis, Shawn began spreading out into TV work and custom sessions, but when Pro Tools rose to prominence in the late 90s, the session landscape changed dramatically. During this time, Shawn moved to Arizona with his wife Melissa and daughter Ivy. Due to the music industry-wide drop-off in session work, and with his second daughter Ella on the way, Shawn made the tough decision to wind down his career as a session musician in order to take on a more stable job and to support his young family. When speaking of this time in his life, Shawn said, "I'm all about guitar, but never at the expense of a relationship, ever, because I don't talk to this thing. When I put it down, it's got nothing to say to me." Shawn had actually sold most of his gear when he got the call asking him to fly out and meet Carrie Underwood. Having met a team, the scenario that Shawn was presented with was learning 22 songs in 36 hours to be ready to drop into an existing touring production. There are 2 great interviews on the internet that talk about this in depth, which I'll post a link to in the description below. But the happy ending to this story is that Shawn owned the Carrie Underwood gig for over 10 years. So this is a cool Shawn Tubbs lick that he used to do when he was touring with Carrie during the section where the band get introduced. It's really fun. You can use it over minor chords, and you can kind of also use it equally well over dominant 7th type chords. So it's a pretty versatile lick. Let's go through it bit by bit. So we actually start off by hitting the tonic of this scale. So we're kind of, it looks like it's largely based around Dorian, but it kind of, you can get away with looking at it as a bit of a mixed Lydian thing, but just a little bit outside. So we start with our little finger on the 15th fret of the B string, and we're pulling off to the 12th fret of the same string. Okay, from there we're grabbing the 13th fret of the high E string, and this is where I was bringing a bit of hybrid picking. You don't have to do this, but in my opinion it makes it a little bit easier. So we have pick, pull off, and then middle finger. Okay, after we've hit that note on the high E, we're doing the pull off again, and this time landing on the 14th fret of the G. So we get okay, and then you can hear that we are doing another pull off from 15th to 12th. Okay, and then we have, which is the 14th fret going down to the 12th fret of the G. So far we have, and then we have this, which is a bend on the 13th fret of the B string, which is loosely speaking like a full step, but it happens quite quickly. We return the note to pitch at the 13th fret, and then we pull off to the 12th. So we get, okay, and here's where we get our first bit of outsideness, which is the 15th fret and the 14th fret on the G string, and then going back to the 12th fret of the B. Okay, this gives us our adjoining phrase into the next part of the lick, which is this. So here we have a descending chromatic idea, starting with the 13th fret of the G string, and we're literally moving down one fret at a time, pulling off from one note to the next. Now for that bit, sounds great by itself, we have 13th fret of the B, 11th fret of the G, and then we're bending the 12th fret of the B up to the 13th. So far we have, okay, at this point we're going to break into a more standard blues bass thing with a couple of double stops. So think kind of pentatonic blues box number 1, which is like 10th fret of the high E string, pulling off 13th to 10th fret of the B, and then 12th fret of the G. And then we repeat the last bit of the lick, which is the pull off from 13th to 10, and then landing on the 12th fret. So we get so far. Okay, so at this point we have a little blues inflection sliding from the 13th fret down to the 12th and then pulling off to the 10th. And this is where we bring our double stops in. So all we're doing is a double stop at the 12th fret of the G and the B and the 10th fret of the G and the B. But we're just punctuating it with that 12th fret. Okay, one more time. We give it a little bend, a little tweak at the 10th fret. And then we have this phrase just to round things off, which again is all kind of blues box stuff. So we've got the 12th fret of the D, 12th fret of the A, and then we slide down a position. So we slide from the 12th to the 10th and then pull off to the 8th. And then basically walk back up the shape. So slowly the whole thing is like this. And try and play the whole thing fast. It will probably be bad, I apologise. Okay, as I say, you can play that over kind of minor chords, over power chords, even over dominant 7th chords, and it sounds pretty cool over all of them. As with like most licks, When you learn them, one, try and find where your reference point is. So in this one, it's easy because we're actually starting on the root. So if you wanted to play this in a different key, like C, for example, you would just have to relocate this so that your lick starts on the root note of C. And the other thing that's really good to do is kind of like analyze the intervals that are happening within the lick. So if we look at the first bit, think about what notes are actually being picked out here. So if we're back in D, we have root, and we're pulling off to the major sixth. So immediately we've got something that suggests maybe like a Dorian or maybe a mixed Lydian thing. Okay, we're hitting like a flat 3. If you wanted to make it sound more majory, you could potentially hit a major third instead. So this is how we start to make licks more malleable, by thinking about the intervals and then thinking about how we could change them to fit with different chords, okay? So work through that and see if you can work out what intervals are being played against, let's say, a root note of D, and that'll give you some idea about how to recreate the character of this sort of lick in different contexts, and you can really make it your own. Sometime during that period, Chris Van Tassel of Rocket Pedals convinced Shawn to start making demo videos. And at this point in time, Shawn's channel has grown to over 25,000 subscribers. He has released a second solo album entitled Demolition, which is a collection of short guitar jams, and continues to do both studio and remote sessions, as well as creating library music and creating teaching resources with companies like Soundslice. He's unquestionably one of the most talented players out there, and you owe it to yourself to take a deep dive into his back catalogue. Somewhere in the depths of the internet, there is even a collection of Django Reinhardt-style gypsy jazz instrumentals that Shawn recorded in the few years prior to landing the karaoke gig, and they are mind-blowing. You have to find them. I think you can still hear them on soundclick.com.
My heart beats country. Come on.
So as always, I'd like to conclude this episode by giving you some listening recommendations. Now, apart from the obvious, which are Shawn's 2 solo records, the first, which I think was late 90s, and it's a fully instrumental acoustic record called Jesus You Are My Life, which is beautiful. There's some stunning guitar playing on it and just absolutely beautiful arrangements. We also have Shawn's latest release, which is Demolition from last year, which is centered around his gear review songs. Now, apart from those 2, where I'd recommend you start if you want to get deeper into Shawn's sort of playing are Crystal Lewis's records. So Shawn's been working with her for over 20 years, I think, at this point. So the great thing about that is that you can jump into several different eras of music and music production and guitar styles, and you hear the kind of palette of guitar sounds changing throughout. But all of Shawn's playing on it is always stellar, it's always beautifully arranged, and there's loads of kind of great ideas you can harvest from those records. Now, aside from that, my second recommendation would be Strength by the Violet Burning. Now, this is a little bit harder to get a hold of, but I think you can still get it as a download from their website. I will have a look, and if I can find it, I'll put a link in the description below. Lastly, for a slightly different style of music, to have a listen to a little bit more of Shawn's kind of rock and country playing, the record he did with Mark Leach, in fact I think it was a record and then another EP after it, are both really good. There's some great telly playing on there, there's some nice arrangements, the songs are fun, and there's just some lovely sort of classic guitar sounds on that record as well. So those would be my 3 main recommendations, but I will put a bigger list again in the description below.
My guitar made me do it.
Thank you.
from me for this episode. I really hope you've enjoyed it. I promise that these are going to become more regular than once a year anyway, which is how long it had been since the last one. I'll explain why another time. You can help me out by liking this video, by dropping me a comment and let me know who you'd like me to have a look at next. And also, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel to be kept up to date with these videos. If you're feeling super cool, I've also set up a buy me a coffee page, which is kind of like a less formal Patreon sort of vibe. I can't monetize these videos because obviously they feature lots of content by other artists, so rightfully so they get paid by me playing their songs, which is exactly how it should be. But I'd love to be able to spend a bit more time making these videos for you guys, so if you feel like buying me a coffee, then I will pop the link in the description below. That's all for now. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you all soon.